A Charlotte woman got an early Christmas gift. She was $50,000, I should say won $50,000 in Saturday's Powerball drawing.
Merry Christmas to her. She matched 4 of the white numbers and the red Powerball to win that money. She bought her ticket at the Harris Teeter on South Tryon Street. Now, no one has hit all 6 numbers to win the jackpot, which now sits at $1.6 billion, billion with a B.
Now, this is the 4th largest prize in the game's history. If you're the lucky winner, you can choose the lump sum of roughly $735 million or the annuity payments that are spread out over the next, seems like thousands of years.
I mean, to get that kind of money,
well,
oh my goodness.
And keep in mind that $735 million, you still get taxes taken out of that.
But I think you still take home several hundred million.
Some 400 million, but.
Because I think 100, I don't think anyone's scoffing at $100 million.
Well, I don't know, my Christmas list.
Is your Christmas list that in depth?
I've got some expensive hobbies.
Okay, if $100 million leaves you with pennies left, we might have to reevaluate.
I'll make it.
We're going to get you a ticket. That's my Christmas gift.
I bought 2.
There we go. Just cut me off a little something.